This is an old article, well, from 2018. And there are two, actually I have one article over here and another one over here. It's about the same news. And this was obvious to those that paid attention, but I have to repeat it for those that are not aware of it. Many of those that voted for Trump, not all, but a general Trump voter, was afraid of losing their status. It had nothing to do with economics. It has nothing to do with getting jobs back. The whole Make America Great Again is about restoring the leverage to the white male. It was all about restoring white leverage. Because there is no white power. I've already explained that. They want to restore white leverage. Because that is what their group's benefit depends on. So, I'm not going to read the whole article or articles. You probably heard this news already. I just want to say the following. Whenever something happens in politics, never listen to the reason they gave. Never. Always look at the background. Look at the bigger picture. Then you'll see why they really are doing or choosing what they're doing and choosing. Let me give a parable to you. Well, it's not really a parable, something that actually happened, but I'm going to change the historical narrative a bit to make it more relatable to you. There was this wife who wanted to get rid of her narcissistic husband. And she was so fierce in her decision that she wanted to get a divorce. People around could not understand why she wanted to divorce a man that treated her so well. Okay, the man had his flaws, but he treated her well. The man made sure that she had abundance. But she was clear she wanted a divorce. So eventually people began to support her. Then one day, after 2 years of going back and forth in court, the husband said, you know what, this needs to stop. Also, for the sake of our children and our families, you want divorce, here you have it. You don't even have to sign it. Here is your divorce. Now, the husband moved on. Then one day, people asked her, this was 4 years after she walked away from her husband, people are asking her about her husband, and she said, well, he's still being difficult and all of that. So people were thinking, what? After 4 years, the man is still having a hold on your life? Now, people now turned on the husband. But then, when they approached the husband showed them a copy of the divorce papers that he signed 2 years ago. And then the people were thinking, what? This woman divorced this man 2 years ago? And she is still pretending or faking as if she is in a struggle for divorce? What's going on? When some people confronted her, she said, yeah, 2 years ago we signed the papers. But then they asked her about why did you kept murmuring, complaining about you wanted a divorce from a man that already divorced you. And the woman tried to turn things around to blame them. She was gaslighting them. She was saying things like, well, I didn't actually say I wanted to divorce him. I knew it was over. But you know, I just had to process things. Now she tried to talk herself out of it. But people kept on putting pressure on her to explain why she was lying to them all the time. Now, this parable is a parable. It refers onto Mexican independence. From 1821, when the revolutionaries declared Mexico independent, well, it was really the Viceroyalty of New Spain that they declared independent from Spain. Cuba decided, no, we don't want anything to do with it. The Philippines all said, no, we don't want anything to do with this. Yucatan, Nueva Galicia, Nuevo Leon, and those smaller kingdoms, they were sucked into the grip of the Mexican revolutionaries. And they declared Mexico independent in 1821. So from 1821 till 1836, that's 15 years long, there was this conflict internationally because Spain refused to recognize Mexico. Also because they acted in a very dishonorable manner on top of the Mexican revolutionaries. Even the people in Mexico and the rest of the viceroyalty of New Spain, that means people in the Californias, in Texas, they also were upset with the Mexican revolutionaries. The first two states, first the Mexican Empire, then the Federal Republic of Mexico, they both failed, all within 15 years. The Mexican Empire only lasted for less than 2 years, and the first Mexican Republic, which was a Federal Republic, also didn't work. So then they made it into a central republic. You still had states. The states were based on the Spanish provinces that had a lot of autonomy, and none of those provinces wanted to give up their autonomy, but they came up with a central republic anyway. And then the Queen of Spain of that time said, okay, you have it. Here's your independence. It was signed in December of 1836. At the time, you already had some steamships. Ships were a bit faster already. So you should expect that next year, by February, it would have been published all across the Mexican Republic that they were independent. It didn't happen. It's until March 1838, around 1.5 years later, that they published that independence was agreed with Spain and that there was peace. So for 1.5 years, they kept the population in the dark. And look at this, the moment it became obvious that Spain already moved on, most of the Mexican territories revolted against the Mexican Republic. They didn't want to be part of it anymore. Actually, they never wanted to be part of it, but after they heard that independence was agreed, it was all over. The country called Mexico was falling apart. It was because later on, in the 1840s, there was a military conflict with the United States that this distracted the people. If there was no military conflict concerning Texas with the United States, that whole thing would have turned into one bloody mess. So it was the military conflict with the United States which led to Mexico losing half of its territory, which led to the growth of the United States as what we know it today. That is what kept the country called Mexico together. It was a distraction. So even that military conflict was a hoax. As I mentioned before, all wars are hoaxes. Because the Mexicans and the Nueva Galicians, the people from Yucatan, all those other peoples did not want to be part of this country called Mexico. And the Masonic rulers in Mexico City, they knew very well that the people never wanted independence and that the people had no interest in working with the revolutionaries. So they kept it in the dark when Spain said, here's your independence. Because they knew that if this would come out, people would see through it all and it would be over. And they had to publish it that they gained independence because all the other foreign ambassadors from France, from Denmark, and I'm not sure it was Denmark, but all those other foreign embassies knew that they got their independence. So when they were pretending to still fight for independence, those foreign ambassadors would think, huh? What's going on there? And they would report back home saying, these people here are fighting for independence while Spain already agreed their independence. So it was more of necessity that he had to reveal things. Now, just like in that parable, that woman that claimed that she was abused, she wanted to get away from her husband gave her in the divorce papers, but she pretended as if she was still fighting. Why did she do it? It's the same reason why those Mexican revolutionaries kept pretending as if there was still a fight with Spain. Because they knew that that was their only leverage over the people. The moment that situation would be gone, they had no leverage anymore. In the parable I just gave unto you, that woman played the victim, and it's that victim role that triggered, or better said, blackmailed people into having sympathy with her. And because people had sympathy with her, nobody examined her. Nobody saw how narcissistic she was. So she could get away with stuff by playing the victim. That was her leverage. And to play the victim, a perpetrator must be in the picture, because you can't be a victim without a perpetrator. So she used her husband to portray him as a perpetrator. Even though he gave her the divorce and he moved on, she kept using him as a perpetrator so that people couldn't examine her. And in a similar way, the Mexican revolutionaries, they kept the population hostage, thinking there was a conflict still with Spain. Well, there wasn't. Because they knew that as long as they could portray Spain as the aggressor, they may get some favor from the people. But the moment this wasn't possible anymore, the moment after 15 years that it became obvious that they couldn't manage the country and that things were going backwards, people were asking questions. And because there was still the possibility that Spain would send its forces and restore the viceroyalty, people were thinking, okay, sooner or later these wackos over there in Mexico City, they'll collapse and things will be just like it was before. When it became obvious that would not happen, people lost it. So they used misinformation as if it was still an independence fight to keep the population trapped. Now, why did I give you those two examples? An historic example of the Mexican revolutionaries and a parable that I made up a few minutes ago. Why? Because the same applies to this Trump situation. And here's what it comes down to. Worldly people, they know deep down inside that without a leverage, they have nothing. That's why they join groups to scapegoat others so that they can get a leverage at someone else's expense. Let me take it like this. If you have a group in a community, let's say you have a Chinese minority somewhere, and this Chinese minority, they manage the economy, they own the companies, they own the ports, they own everything. So they actually running that country. It's not their country. It may be Vietnam or it may be Malaysia. Well, before the 1960s, you had colonies, but let's go even before that, in the 16th, 17th century. Let's say you had the Chinese minority, a migrant population. And within that migrant population, you had some key actors that govern the economy of the host country. Let's say they always treated the host population the right way, by being generous towards them. Let's say that one day the Chinese people lose that economic leverage. Will they fear any backlash by the population? No. Because everyone will remember that it were the Chinese that kept things going. They will always remember the good things Chinese did for them. Yes, there were some Chinese that went too far, but the Chinese community itself dealt with them. So they even dealt with their own when their own mistreated the host population. Such a group, even when they are losing financial assets, they will not lose their grip on the population, though to what they contributed to. But let's say now you have another place where you have a Chinese minority, but this Chinese minority abuses, mistreats, gaslights, and harms the local population, which is in a majority. So there's resentment against Chinese in that community, but nobody dares to say it because you can lose your job or you may have a Chinese mob coming after you. What if one day it becomes obvious that the Chinese community over there lost all their financial assets? What do you think is going to happen to that community? There will be fierce retaliation against them. All the trauma that was caused by them, people are going to demand answers. I'm not saying that there will be riots against them and massacres or genocide directly, but people are going to ask questions. Why did you tolerate what your grandparents or great-grandparents did? Why didn't you do anything? If they still have their financial leverage, they can talk themselves out of it. Why? Because they have a hold on the population. The population needs them. But if they don't have that leverage anymore, they can't be powerful anymore, and now they can face trial, they can be imprisoned, and they can face a lot of harm, and they can't get themselves out of it. So, In this case, if you have a group, because I use the Chinese as an example, if you have a group that had a leverage and they abuse and misuse their leverage, they know very well down inside they've abused and misused their leverage. When the time comes that the leverage is decreasing, they'll become fearful. Because they know deep down inside that things will backfire on them. So they will cling onto that little leverage they have at all costs. And that is what's happening in the United States now. That's why you have this Trump era. Because white leverage is decreasing, and those who see clearly that without that leverage, they're doomed are clinging onto it with all they can. It's not only in America. In America this happens. It's happening in every area where you used to have a majority white population. Now, this video is not about politics. I'm using politics to teach you something here. Worldly people know that they need to have a leverage. It can even be in a very small setting. If you are in a village, you need to get along with other people. But let's say now that you really don't want to go to local parties all the time. If you have no leverage, then you end up going to local parties all the time because you need to be on good terms with people around you. Because once you're not on good terms with people around you, well, you're going to have issues, violent issues soon. But what if someone fakes having a disease? Or they fake having pain in their body? Now people will not force them to go to the party, because who's going to force a sick individual to a party? Nobody does something like that. So now they're using that scam that they have a sickness, or that they are sick, as an excuse to spend time alone and to do other stuff. In this case, they didn't say no to the people, so nobody can feel hurt, nobody can feel upset, but at the same time, they don't have to participate against their wishes, so they have a leverage now. Even on a personal, day-to-day level, worldly people know that they need to have a leverage, because without a leverage, you can't really do anything. And even on a daily level, on a day-to-day level, worldly people know that if you abused or misused your leverage, and soon you lose that leverage, and people find out, you're finished. That is why narcissists like to remember you of painful stuff of your past. Why? To traumatize you again, so they can have a hold on you. They are doing this when they are losing their grip on you. They trigger an old trauma to distract you. So understand this, believer. When worldly people, when groups in the world, because it goes through groups most of the time, when groups in the world, whether it's an ethnicity or whether it's a village or a company or corporation, whatever it is, whenever groups in the world see that they're losing their leverage, their true colors are revealed. When they see that they are losing what they consider power, the mask slips off. Now they're not so kind anymore. Now they're not beating around the bush anymore. Now they don't have patience with you anymore. Now they're showing the true face. Why? Because they know that they are losing their grip, and once they've lost all their grip, they cannot get away with anything anymore. So believers need to learn from this. Wherever you are, look around you. It can be that you're at a cafe or at Starbucks somewhere, and you see that every time you're there, there's a group of friends sitting there and another group of friends over there. There's also politics on a very tiny scale. You have a group of people that want to maintain their leverage in that tiny community, and you have another group that challenges it. So now there's rivalry. So when you see this, you can see, oh, there's rivalry going on here. And when you see that people from one group are looking angry at another group, then you know, okay, there's an escalation going on. That's how you need to pay attention. Not only by checking newspapers or checking what's going on online. Where you are on a local level, check the tensions, check the energetic climate. Then you also know how to approach different types of people. Until Christ returns, this fight for leverage at each other's expense will continue. As a believer, you're not part of it, but you are being affected by it. And if you don't participate in this fight, that is society, because society is based on conflict, then they'll turn on you. Because they will ask, how come you are not afraid of losing leverage, this and that. And once they experience that you have real leverage, it can't be taken away from you, oh, that means that they can't control you. And then their true colors will be revealed also. So always examine the energetic climate around you. Worldly people cannot take it when they're losing their leverage. So sometimes you're far better off letting others think they have a leverage over you while they don't. I say sometimes, not always. It's perfectly fine to take actions, sometimes even public actions. Christ did it also. But then there are also times it's far better for you not to reveal the power you have. Because you have real power. They don't. They only have a leverage that's based on violence. Sometimes it's better to let people think that they have the leverage, because when they think they have the leverage, they are more at ease. And when they are more at ease, they will less likely escalate conflicts or go to the extreme. The moment people feel that they're losing leverage, and if they were people that invested that leverage in the wrong things, they will escalate. So sometimes it's just for de-escalation that you allow people to think they have the leverage. You allow them to think that they can get away with stuff. While the opposite is true. That's also part of shaking the dust off your feet. Just realize that that's how world people are, that's how groups in the world are. They cling with all their strength onto their leverage. Well, now you also know why sometimes you have people turning on you just like that. Your influence threatens their leverage. So they become violent defending their leverage. Because they know that without that leverage, they're toast. Because they know that they have gone too far, or that they will go too far, because they always have their reasons. They know how unreliable and how untrustworthy they are. So they will project this onto others. That's why they cling onto to their leverage so much. So when they see you with real power, they'll perceive you as a threat. There's nothing wrong with walking in the power. You should walk in the power. But there are times it's better not to show too much what you're capable of. And even the fictional characters of those comic books know this. Superman knows this. Batman knows this. Spider-Man knows it. All those superhero characters, they know this. That's how worldly people are. When they see that they can't blackmail you, you are in trouble. Well, they'll figure that out anyway. But as far as you can, and as far as you can see that it's better, let them think they can get away with stuff. Let them think that you're stupid. Let them think all of that. Meanwhile, you continue in the faith. Well, meanwhile, you continue with your projects. Meanwhile, you have ease because they are relieved. Not that you're going out there relieving them, but you get what I'm saying. Outsmart them. Agree with Christ.